So, back in 2003, the United States went to war over a threat that, as it turns out, wasn't actually there. How in the world did that happen? Well, today we're digging into a 2008 book called Lessons from Iraq. It's basically a collection of essays that takes a hard look at this huge decision, all to figure out one thing: how we can avoid making the exact same mistake again.
You'd think this quote was written yesterday, right? But it's actually from T.E. Lawrence. Yep, Lawrence of Arabia, and he wrote it way back in 1920 about the British getting bogged down in Iraq. It's just a shocking reminder that the challenges in this part of the world run deep, and the stakes have always been incredibly, incredibly high.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to look at the whole justification for the war itself. Then we'll dive into the 4 main reasons the book's authors say were the real drivers. After that, we'll uncover the true cost, both in money and in human lives. And finally, we'll pull out the key lessons the book says we absolutely have to learn if we don't want to repeat history.
Okay, so the first major point the book makes is this. The Iraq War wasn't a war of necessity. It was a war of choice. And it was a choice built on a new and pretty radical idea in foreign policy, the doctrine of preventive war.
This slide really gets to the heart of the whole argument, and the difference is crucial. Look, a preemptive war is basically legal. It's like seeing a punch flying at your face and ducking. The threat is immediate, it's real, and you have to act. But a preventive war, that's totally different. That's not about dodging a punch. That's about walking across the room and knocking someone out because you think they might, someday, in the future, decide to throw a punch. And the book argues that was the logic for Iraq. It's a really dangerous shift that turns war from a last resort into a potential first option.
So if the threat wasn't right there in our face, what was really driving the decision? Let's get into the book's breakdown of the 4 main motives behind the invasion.
According to the book, it boils down to these 4 things. First, just to make this idea of preventive war a normal, accepted thing. Second, to expand what one author calls a kind of American imperialism. Third, the invasion was meant to be a demonstration model, basically a massive show of force to warn any other country about what happens when you defy the US. And fourth, a reason the authors believe was kind of hiding in plain sight, getting a lock on geopolitical control over the Persian Gulf and all of its oil.
So, that idea of imperialism, what does that actually look like? Well, check out this number. At the time the book was written, 737 was the official number of U.S. military bases in over 130 countries. The argument here is that this is basically a modern empire. It's not an empire of colonies, but one of military satellites all over the globe. And when you have that kind of footprint, the authors say, intervention starts to look like the default answer for everything, which makes conflicts like the one in Iraq way more likely.
Now, let's talk about the money. This is a huge part of the book, especially the section by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. And his argument is a bombshell, that the true cost of the war wasn't just way bigger than we were told, but that it was actively hidden from the public using some pretty creative accounting.
I mean, this was the original sales pitch, right? We were told this would be cheap, that Iraq's own oil money would pay for the whole reconstruction. This quote from Paul Wolfowitz really captures that initial, almost unbelievably optimistic forecast. But, as the book shows, the reality was a completely different story. And here's the trick to how the costs were hidden. See, the government uses what's called cash accounting. It only counts the money it spends right now, this year. The book's authors say we should have been using accrual accounting, which is what every major company does. That includes costs you know you're going to have to pay down the line. I mean, look at this table. Hundreds of billions for future veterans' medical and disability costs. These are absolutely real costs of the war, but they were kept off the official books, hiding the true price tag from everybody.
So what's the real grand total? Well, when the authors added up everything, all the hidden costs, the long-term veteran care, the interest on the debt we took on to pay for it all, they landed on this number: $3 trillion. I mean, the gap between it'll pay for itself and $3 trillion is just staggering. And that's the core of their entire financial critique.
But it's not just about the money, not even close. The book really forces you to look at the massive human toll this war took. The authors argue that what was sold as a liberation ended up creating what one writer called the Democratic Republic of Fear.
This quote, it just cuts through all the policy talk and the numbers. It's from a regular woman in Baghdad. She had been persecuted by Saddam's regime, she'd lived through years of sanctions, and then she found this new reality to be even worse, even more terrifying. It's just a brutal reminder of the real, devastating human consequences that are buried under all the strategic debates.
Okay, so after all of that, where do we go from here? What are we supposed to do with this information? This brings us to the final, and honestly, the most important part of the book, the lessons we need to learn if we're ever going to avoid a catastrophe like this again.
All right, so the book boils it all down to 4 huge lessons. First, just say no. Formally reject the whole idea of preventive war. Second, demand honest math. We have to account for the real, long-term price of any conflict. Third, start shrinking that massive global military footprint that pushes us toward intervention. And finally, number 4 is a fundamental change in strategy. Instead of trying to be the world's go-to intervener, the U.S. should become a balancer of last resort, only using its power when it is absolutely necessary.
And this is really the question the book leaves us with, isn't it? It's been over a decade since it was written, even longer since the war started. So have these lessons actually sunk in? Have we studied the anatomy of this mistake closely enough to stop the next one from happening? Honestly, that's a question for all of us to think about.